The sound you hear is a crackling fire in an elegant Victorian-era drawing room on Christmas Eve. A group of fashionable gentlemen gather around the fire, seated in leather club chairs, puffing dreamily on their cigars and sipping brandy. After a long silence, one of the older gentlemen begins telling a ghost story. This is the start of Octoberpod. Lost Hearts by Montague R. James. Adapted especially for Octoberpod by John Iger. Narrated by Edward October. It was, as far as I can ascertain, in the year 1811 that a carriage drew up before the door of Asserby Hall, in the heart of Lincolnshire. The little boy, who was the only passenger in the carriage, and who had jumped out as soon as it had stopped, looked about him with the keenest curiosity during the short interval that elapsed between the ringing of the bell and the opening of the hall door. He saw a tall, square, red-brick house built in the reign of Queen Anne. A stone-pillared porch had been added in the purer classical style of 1790. The windows of the house were many, tall and narrow, with small panes and thick white woodwork. An evening light shone in the building, making the window panes glow like so many fires. Away from the hall, in front, stretched a flat park, studded with oaks and fringed with firs, which stood out against the sky. The clock in the church tower, buried in trees on the edge of the park, only its golden weathercock catching the light, was striking 6. And the sound came gently beating down the wind. It was altogether a pleasant impression, though tinged with the sort of melancholy appropriate to an overcast evening, that was conveyed to the mind by the boy who was standing in the porch, waiting for the door to open to him. The carriage had brought him from Warwickshire, where, some 6 months before, he had been left an orphan. Now, owing to the generous offer of his elderly cousin, Mr. Abney, he'd come to live at Asserby. The offer was unexpected, because all who knew anything of Mr. Abney looked upon him as a somewhat austere recluse, into whose steady-going household the advent of a small boy would import a new and, it seemed, incongruous element. The truth is that very little was known of Mr. Abney's pursuits or temper. The professor of Greek at Cambridge had been heard to say that no one knew more of the religious beliefs of the later pagans than did the owner of Asserby. Certainly his library contained all of the then available books bearing on the subject. He had contributed a description of his library to the Gentleman's Magazine, and he had written a remarkable series of articles in the Critical Museum on the superstitions of the Romans of the Lower Empire. He was looked upon, in fine, as a man wrapped up in his books, and it was a matter of great surprise among his neighbors that he should even have heard of his orphan cousin, Stephen Elliott, much more that he should have volunteered to make him an inmate of Asserby Hall. Whatever may have been expected by his neighbors, it is certainly that Mr. Abney, the tall, the thin, the austere, seemed inclined to give his young cousin a kindly reception. The moment the front door was open, he darted out of his study, rubbing his hands with delight. It seemed a little odd that Mr. Abney should have asked the boy his age twice in the first 2 minutes of their acquaintance. Stephen said that he would be 12 his next birthday. "And when is your birthday, my dear boy?" asked Mr. Abney. "The 28th of December. Childermassay. Feast of the Innocents and all that." That's very well. An auspicious day for a birthday, wouldn't you say? Nearly a year hence, isn't it? I like, I like to get these things down in my book. You are sure that it's your 12th birthday? You are certain? Stephen assured Mr. Abney that he would be 12, for certain, come Childermas. Abney's butler Parks, a very staid personage, then took the boy to Mrs. Bunch's room in the lower regions of the house. Mrs. Bunch was the most comfortable and human person whom Stephen had as yet met in Azerby. She made him completely at home. They were great friends in a quarter of an hour, and great friends they remained. Mrs. Bunch had been born in the neighborhood some 55 years before the date of Stephen's arrival, and her residence at the Hall was of 20 years' standing. Consequently, if anyone knew the ins and outs of the house and the district, Mrs. Bunch knew them, and she was by no means disinclined to communicate her information. Certainly there were plenty of things about the Hall and the Hall gardens which Stephen, who was an adventurous and inquiring turn, was anxious to have explained to him. Who built the temple at the end of the Laurel Walk? Who was the old man whose picture hung on the staircase? The one sitting at a table with a skull under his hand? These and many similar points were cleared up by the resources of Mrs. Bunch's powerful intellect. There were others, however, of which the explanations furnished were less satisfactory. One evening in November, Stephen was sitting by the fire in the housekeeper's room, reflecting on his surroundings. "Is Mr. Abney a good man? Will he go to heaven?" he suddenly asked, with the peculiar confidence which children possess in the ability of their elders to settle these questions, the decision of which is believed to be reserved for other tribunals. "Good? Bless the child," said Mrs. Bunch. "Master's as kind a soul as ever I see. Didn't I never tell you of the little boy as he took in out of the street, as you may say, this 7 years back, and the little girl 2 years after I come here?" "Well," said Mrs. Bunch, "the little girl I don't seem to recollect so much about. I know Master brought her back with him from his walk one day and give orders to Mrs. Ellis, as was housekeeper then, as she should be took every care with. And the poor child hadn't no one belonging to her. She telled me so, her own self. And here she lived with us a matter of 3 weeks it might be, and then, whether she were something of a gypsy in her blood or what not, but one morning she out of her bed, and afore any of us had opened an eye, and neither track nor yet trace of her have I set eyes on since. Master was wonderful put about, and all the ponds dragged, and it's my belief she was had away by them gypsies, and there was singing round the house for as much as an hour the night she went, and Parks, he declares he heard them a-calling in the woods all that afternoon. Dear, dear, a odd child she was, so silent in her ways and all, but I was wonderful taken up with her, so domesticated she was. Surprising. And that poor boy, sighed Mrs. Bunch. He were a foreigner. Giovanni, he called himself. And he come a-tweaking and dirty-gurty round about the drive one winter day, and Master had him in that minute, and asked all about where he came from, and how old he was, and how he made his way, and where was his relatives, and all as kind as heart could wish. But it went the same way with him. They're a unruly lot, them foreign nations, I suppose. And he was off one fine morning just the same as the girl. Why he went and what he done was our question for as much as a year after, for he never took his hurdy-gurdy, and there it lays on the shelf. The remainder of the evening was spent by Stephen in miscellaneous cross-examination of Mrs. Bunch, and in efforts to extract a tune from the hurdy-gurdy. That night, he had a curious dream. At the end of the passage at the top of the house, in which his bedroom was situated, there was an old disused bathroom. It was kept locked, but the upper half of the door was glazed, and, since the muslin curtains which used to hang there had long been gone, you could look in and see the lead-lined bath affixed to the wall on the right hand, with its head towards the window. On the night of which I am speaking, Stephen found himself, as he thought, looking through the glazed door. The moon was shining through the window, and he was gazing at a figure which lay in the bath. His description of what he saw reminds me of what I once beheld myself in the famous vaults of St. Michan's Church in Dublin, which possessed the horrid property of preserving corpses from decay for centuries. A figure inexpressibly thin and pathetic, of a dusty leaden color, enveloped in a shroud-like garments. The thin lips crooked into a faint and dreadful smile, the hands pressed tightly over the region of his heart. As he looked upon it, a distant, almost inaudible moan seemed to issue from its lips, and the arms began to stir. The terror of the sight forced Stephen backwards, and he spoke to the fact that he was indeed standing on the cold boarded floor of the passage in the full light of the moon. With a courage which I do not think can be common among boys of his age, he went to the door of the bathroom to ascertain if the figure of his dream were really there. It was not, and he went back to bed. Mrs. Bunch was much impressed next morning by his story, and went so far as to replace the muslin curtain over the glazed door of the bathroom. Mr. Abney, moreover, to whom he confided his experiences at breakfast, was greatly interested, and made notes of the matter in what he called his book. The winter solstice was approaching, as Mr. Abney frequently reminded his cousin, adding that this had been always considered by the ancients to be a critical time of year, that Stephen would do well to take care of himself and to shut his windows at night. Two incidents that occurred about this time made an impression upon Stephen's mind. The first occurred after an unusually uneasy and depressed night that he had passed, though he could not recall any particular dream that he had had. The following evening, Mrs. Bunch was occupying herself in mending his nightgown, and scolded him for tearing his nightdress all to flinders. There was indeed a most destructive and apparently wanton series of slits and scorings in the garment, which would undoubtedly require a skillful needle to make good. They were confined to the left side of the chest, long, parallel slits about 6 inches in length, some of them not quite piercing the texture of the linen. Stephen could only express his entire ignorance of their origin. He was sure they were not there the night before. Indeed, they were just the same as the scratches on the outside of his bedroom door, and the boy was sure he never had anything to do with making them. Mrs. Bunch gazed at him open-mouthed, then snatched up a candle, departed hastily from the room, and was heard making her way upstairs. In a few minutes she came down. "Well," she said, "Master Stephen, it's a funny thing to me how them marks and scratches can come there, too high up for any cat or dog to have made 'em, much less a rat. For all the world like an old crone's fingernails." "I wouldn't say nothing to master, not if I was you, Master Stephen, my dear, and just turn the key of the door when you go to your bed." Stephen told her he always locked his door every night after saying his prayers. This pleased Mrs. Bunch, who believed that if you always say your prayers, then no one can hurt you. Herewith, Mrs. Bunch addressed herself to mending the injured nightgown, with intervals of meditation until bedtime. This was on a Friday night in late November or early December of 1812. On the following evening, the usual duet of Stephen and Mrs. Bunch was augmented by the sudden arrival of Mr. Parks, the butler, who as a rule kept himself rather to himself in his own pantry. He did not see that Stephen was there. He was, moreover, flustered and less slow of speech than was his wont. "Master may get up his own wine if he likes of an evening," was his first remark. "Either I do it in the daytime or not at all, Mrs. Bunch. I don't know what it may be, very like it's the rats or the wind got into the cellars, but I'm not so young as I was, and I can't go through with it as I've done." Mrs. Bunch agreed that the hall was a surprising place to find rats. "I'm not denying that, Mrs. Bunch," said Parks. And to be sure, many's a time I've heard the tale from the men in the shipyards about the rat that could speak. I never laid no confidence in that before, but tonight if I'd demeaned myself to lay my ear to the door in the further bin, I could pretty much have heard what they was saying. I have now arrived at December 28, 1812. It was a day of curious experiences for Stephen, a windy, noisy day which filled the house and the gardens with a restless impression. As Stephen stood by the fence of the grounds and looked out into the park, he felt as if an endless procession of unseen people were sweeping past him on the wind, borne on resistlessly and aimlessly, vainly striving to stop themselves, to catch at something that might arrest their flight, and bring them once again into the contact with the living world of which they had formed a part. After luncheon that day, Mr. Abney asked Stephen if he could manage to come to him in his study as late as 11 o'clock that night. Abney said that he'd be busy until that time, and wished to show the boy something connected with his future life, on his birthday, something most important that he should know about. He told Stephen he was not to mention the matter to Mrs. Bunch, nor to anyone else in the house, and that he had better go to his room at the usual time. Here was a new excitement added to life. Stephen eagerly grasped at the opportunity of sitting up till 11 o'clock. He looked in at the library door on his way upstairs that evening and saw a brazier, which he had often noticed in the corner of the room, moved out before the fire. An old silver-gilt cup stood on the table, filled with red wine, and some written sheets of paper lay near it. Mr. Abney was sprinkling some incense on the brazier from a round silver box as Stephen passed, but did not seem to notice his step. The wind had fallen, and there was a still night and a full moon. At about 10 o'clock, Stephen was standing at the open window of his bedroom, looking out over the country. Still as the night was, the mysterious population of the distant moonlit woods was not yet lulled to rest. From time to time there came strange cries as if from lost and despairing wanderers. They might be the notes of owls or water birds, yet they did not quite resemble either sound. Were not they coming nearer? Now they sounded from the nearer side of the water, and in a few moments they seemed to be floating about among the shrubberies. Then they ceased. But then, as Stephen was thinking of shutting the window and resuming his reading of Robinson Crusoe, he caught sight of two figures standing on the graveled terrace that ran along the garden side of the hall. The figures of a boy and girl, as it seemed. They stood side by side, looking up at the windows. Something in the form of the girl recalled irresistibly his dream of the figure in the bath. The boy inspired him with more acute fear. Whilst the girl stood still, half smiling an awful smile, with her hands clasped over her heart, the boy, a thin shape, with black hair and ragged clothing, raised his arms in the air with an appearance of menace and of unappeasable hunger and longing. The moon shone upon his almost transparent hands, and Stephen saw that the nails were fearfully long, and that the light shone through them. As he stood with his arms thus raised, he disclosed a terrifying spectacle. On the left side of his chest there opened a black and gaping hole, as if his very flesh had been rent open, and there fell upon Stephen's brain, rather upon his ear, the impression of one of those hungry, desolate cries that he had heard resounding over the woods of Azerby all that evening In another moment, this dreadful pair had moved swiftly and noiselessly over the dry gravel, and he saw them no more. Inexpressibly frightened as he was, he determined to take his candle and go down to Mr. Abney's study, for the hour appointed for their meeting was near at hand. The study, or library, opened out of the front hall on one side, and Stephen, urged on by his terrors, did not take long in getting there. To effect an entrance was not so easy. The door was not locked, he felt sure, for the key was on the outside of it as usual. His repeated knocks produced no answer. Mr. Abney was engaged. He was speaking. What? Why did he try to cry out? And why was the cry choked in his throat? Had he, too, seen the mysterious children? But now everything was quiet, and the door yielded to Stephen's terrified and frantic pushing. On the table in Mr. Abney's study, certain papers were found which explained the situation to Stephen Elliott when he was of an age to understand them. The most important sentences were as follows. It was a belief very strongly and generally held by the ancients, of whom wisdom in these matters I have had such experience as induces me to place confidence in their assertions, that by enacting certain processes which to us moderns have something of a barbaric complexion, a very remarkable enlightenment of the spiritual faculties in man may be attained, that, for example, by absorbing the personalities of certain number of his fellow creatures, an individual may gain a complete ascendancy over those orders of spiritual beings which control the elemental forces of our universe. It is recorded of Simon Magus that he was able to fly in the air, to become invisible, or to assume any form he pleased by the agency of the soul of a boy whom he had murdered. I find it set down, moreover, with considerable detail in the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, that similar happy results may be produced by the absorption of the hearts of not less than 3 human beings below the age of 21 years. To the testing of the truth of this receipt I have devoted the greater part of the last 20 years, selecting as the corpora vilia of my experiment such persons as could conveniently be removed without occasioning a sensible gap in society. The first step I effected by the removal of one Phoebe Stanley, a girl of gypsy extraction, on 28th of December, 1792. The second by the removal of a wandering Italian lad named Giovanni Paoli on the night of December 28, 1805. The final victim, to employ a word repugnant in the highest degree to my feelings, must be my own cousin, Stephen Elliott. His day must be December 28th, 1812. The best means of effecting the required absorption is to remove the heart from the living subject, to reduce it to ashes, and to mingle them with about a pint of some red wine, preferably port. The remains of the first 2 subjects at last it will be well to conceal. A disused bathroom or wine cellar will be found convenient for such a purpose. Some annoyance may be experienced from the psychic portion of the subjects, which popular language dignifies with the name of ghosts. But the main philosophic temperament, to whom alone the experiment is appropriate, will be little prone to attach importance to the feeble efforts of these beings to wreak their vengeance upon him. I contemplate with the liveliest satisfaction the enlarged and emancipated existence which the experiment, if successful, will confer upon me, not only placing me beyond the reach of human justice, so-called, but eliminating to a great extent the prospect of death itself. Mr. Abney was found in his chair, his head thrown back, his face stamped with an expression of rage, fright, and mortal pain. In his left side was a terrible wound, less like a cut than like the ripping open of the fabric of his flesh and bone, exposing a deep cavity wherein his heart should have rested. The heart had been removed utterly. There was no blood on Mr. Abney's hands, and a long knife that lay on the table was perfectly clean. There are some who suppose that a savage wildcat might have inflicted the injuries, but no one who had seen the state of Mr. Abney would vouch for this theory. The window of the study was open, and it was the opinion of the coroner that Mr. Abney had met his death by the agency of some wild creature. But Stephen Elliott's study of the papers I have quoted led him to a very different conclusion. Crossroads, a pagan Christmas carol by Amber Jourdan, is a wild ride on the Yuletide dark side. Rodney takes a fateful and angry exit from his family's Christmas Eve gathering. Out in the snow, he drunkenly walks into a globe of light at a crossroads. There he experiences Christmases past, present, and future, with the old gods themselves as his guide. Brimming with mythology and folklore, The Crossroads, a pagan Christmas carol, is a dark new take on a holiday classic. Readers are saying, "This is now my favorite version of a Christmas carol. I didn't expect him to pop his eye out. That was really cool, harrowing and enlightening. This isn't your grandma's Christmas tale, but it might be your great-great-great-grandma's. It burrows straight into your spleen." Find The Crossroads, a pagan Christmas carol by Amber Jourdan on Amazon. Available in hardcover, paperback, or on the Kindle. And while you're at it, pick up Amber Jourdan's first book, Tales from a Witch, Terrifying Travels and Traditions. Celebrate the old ways this holiday season with The Crossroads, a pagan Christmas carol by Amber Jourdan. Get your copy now. I'd been sitting with my friend Hugh Granger, my Uncle Edward, and two other men smoking cigars and enjoying a drop of brandy or cognac after the hullabaloo of an exceedingly busy Christmas day. I put another log on and poked up the fire. Hugh has got, so I've always considered, that sense of drama which is so necessary for the telling of stories, especially ghost stories. Two ghoultide classics, Octoberpod's Ghost Story for Christmas, adapted especially for Octoberpod by John Iger, from the stories The Bus Conductor by EF Benson and A School Story by Montague R. James, narrated by Edward October. "18 months ago," Hugh began, after some prodding, "I had let my flat, you may remember, and came up from the country to stay with you for a week. We had dined alone in Graham Street, and after dinner, I went out to some party, and you stopped at home. You, gave me your latchkey when I went out, and on coming back, I found you had gone to bed. So, I suppose it was rather late when I went upstairs. You had put me in the front room, on the 3rd floor overlooking the street, a room which I thought you generally occupied yourself. Even though there had been a moon when I started to my party, on my return, the whole sky was cloud-covered, and it both looked and felt as if we might have a thunderstorm before morning. I was feeling very sleepy and heavy, and it was not till after I had got into bed that I noticed the shadows of the window frames on the blind, that only one of the windows was open. But it did not seem worthwhile to get out of bed in order to open it, though it felt rather airless and uncomfortable, and I went to sleep. What time it was when I awoke, I do not know, but it was certainly not yet dawn, and I was being conscious of such an extraordinary stillness which prevailed. There was no sound either of foot passengers or wheeled traffic. The music of life appeared to be absolutely mute. But now, instead of being sleepy and heavy, I felt, though I must have slept an hour or two at the most, since it was not yet dawn, perfectly fresh and wide awake, and the effort which had seemed not worth making before, that of getting out of bed and opening the other window, was quite easy now, and I pulled up the blind, threw it open, and leaned out. For somehow I parched and pined for fresh air. Even outside, the oppression was very noticeable, and though, as you know, I am not easily given to feel the mental effects of climate, I was aware of an awful creepiness coming over me. I tried to analyze it away, but without success. The past day had been pleasant. I looked forward to another pleasant day tomorrow, and yet I was full of some nameless apprehension. I felt, too, dreadfully lonely in this stillness before the dawn. Then I heard suddenly, and not very far away, the sound of some approaching vehicle. I could distinguish the tread of 2 horses walking at a slow foot-pace. They were, though not yet visible, coming up the street, and yet this indication of life did not abate that dreadful sense of loneliness which I have spoken of. Also, in some dim, unformulated way, that which was coming seemed to me to have something to do with the cause of my impression. Then the vehicle came into sight. At first I could not distinguish what it was. Then I saw that the horses were black and had long tails, and that what they dragged was made of glass, but had a black frame. It was a hearse, empty. It was moving up this side of the street. It stopped at your door. I was still leaning out of the window, and I remember also wondering, yet only momentarily, how odd it was that I saw things, or rather the one thing I was looking at, so distinctly. Of course, there was a moon behind the clouds, but it was very curious how every detail of the hearse and the horses was visible. There was only one man, the driver, with it, and the street was otherwise absolutely empty. It was at him I was looking now. I could see every detail of his clothes, but from where I was, so high above him, I could not see his face. He had on gray trousers, brown boots, black coat buttoned all the way up, and a little hat. Over his shoulder there was a strap, which seemed to support some sort of little bag. He looked exactly like a bus conductor. He looked up at me. He had a rather long, thin face, and on his left cheek there was a mole with a growth of dark hair on it. All this was as distinct as if it had been noonday, and as if I was within a yard of him. But so instantaneously was all that takes so long in the telling, I had not time to think it strange that the driver of a hearse should be so unceremoniously dressed. Then he touched his hat to me and jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "Just room for one inside, sir," he said. There was something so odious, so coarse, so unfeeling about this that I instantly drew my head in, pulled the blind down again, and then, for what reason I do not know, turned on the electric light in order to see what time it was. The hands of my watch pointed to 11:30. There was stillness and silence again. I expected every moment to hear muffled footsteps on the stairs, footsteps moving slowly and smallly under the weight of a heavy burden. But from inside the house there was no sound whatever. Outside, too, there was the same dead silence, while the hearse waited at the door. And the minutes ticked on, and at length I began to see a difference in the light in the room, and knew that the dawn was beginning to break outside. But how had it happened, then, that if the corpse was to be removed at night, it had not gone, and that the hearse still waited when morning was already coming? Presently I got out of bed again, and with the sense of strong physical shrinking, I went to the window and pulled back the blind. The dawn was coming fast. The whole street was lit by that silver, hueless light of morning. But there was no hearse there. Once again I looked at my watch. It was just 4:15, but I would swear that not half an hour had passed since it had told me that it was 11:30. Then a curious double sense, as if I was living in the past and at the same moment had been living in some other time, came over me. It was dawn on June 25th, and the street, as natural, was empty. But a little while ago the driver of a hearse had spoken to me, and it was 11:30. What was that driver? To what plane did he belong? And again, what 11:30 was it that I had seen recorded on the dial of my watch? And then I told myself the whole thing had been a dream. But if you ask me whether I believed what I told myself, I must confess I did not. I can only say that I believed myself to have been wide awake. In any case, the rest of the story is odd. I went out of town again the next afternoon, and I may say that I don't think that even for a moment did I get the haunting sense of what I had seen or dreamed that night out of my mind. It was present to me always, as some vision unfulfilled. It was as if some clock had struck the 4 quarters, and I was still waiting to hear what the hour would be. Months afterward, I was in London again, but only for the day. I arrived at Victoria about 11 and took the Underground to Sloane Street in order to see if you were in town and would give me lunch. Crisp white snowflakes began to shower down and coat the street. I intended to take a bus from the King's Road as far as Graham Street. There was one standing at the corner just as I came out of the station, but I saw that the top was full and the inside appeared to be full also. Just as I came up to it, the conductor, who I suppose had been inside collecting fares and whatnot, came out onto the step within a few feet of me. He wore gray trousers, brown boots, a black coat buttoned all the way up, a little conductor's hat, and over his shoulder was a strap on which hung his little machine for punching tickets. I saw his face, too. It was the face of the driver of the hearse, with a mole on his left cheek. Then he spoke to me, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "Just room for one inside, sir," he said. At that, a sort of panic took possession of me, and I knew I gesticulated wildly with my arms and cried, "No, no!" But at that moment I was living not in the hour that was then passing, but in that hour which had passed months ago on that hot oppressive night, when I leaned from the window of the bedroom just before the dawn broke. At this moment, too, I knew that my spy-hole had been opposite the spy-hole into the spiritual world. What I had seen there had some significance, now being fulfilled, and I stood there on the pavement, shaking and trembling in the snow. I was opposite the post office at the corner, and just as the bus started, my eye fell on the clock in the window. It was 4:15. The bus pulled out from the pavement into the street in order to get round a van that was standing in front of it. At the moment, there came down the King's Road a big motor car going at a hideously reckless pace. It skidded on the slippery skin of new-fallen snow and crashed full into the bus, burrowing into it like a steel bolt. And that's my story, he said. We sat in silence for many minutes before my Uncle Edward struck up a conversation with the older gentleman sitting closest to him about their private school days. "At our school," said Uncle Edward, "we had a ghost's footmark on the staircase. Oh, very unconvincing. Just the shape of a shoe with a square toe, if I remember right. The staircase was a stone one. I never heard any story about the thing, which seems odd when you come to think of it. Why didn't somebody invent a story, I wonder?" "You never can tell with little boys. They have a mythology of their own. There's a subject for you. The folklore of private schools. I imagine if you were to investigate the cycle of ghost stories, for instance, which the boys at private schools tell each other, they would all turn out to be highly compressed versions of stories out of books." The older man at Uncle Edward's elbow said, "I really don't know if it counts as a boys' school haunting, but this is what was in my mind. It happened at my private school 30-odd years ago, and I haven't any explanation of it." The school, I mean, was near London. It was established in a large and fairly old house, a great white building with very fine grounds about it. There were large cedars in the garden, as there are in so many of the older gardens in the Thames Valley, and ancient elms in 3 or 4 fields which we used for our games. When I came there, I became fast friends with a Highland boy, whom I will call MacLeod, and got to know him very well. He was not an exceptional boy in any way, not particularly good at books or games, but he suited me. The school was a large one. There must have been from 120 to 130 boys there as a rule, and so a considerable staff of masters was required, and there was rather frequent changes among them. One term, perhaps it was my 3rd or 4th, a new master made his appearance. His name was Samson. He was a tallish, stoutish, pale, black-bearded man. I think we liked him. He had traveled a good deal, and had stories which amused us on our school walks, so that there was some competition among us to get within earshot of him. I remember, too, that he had a charm on his watch chain that attracted my attention one day, and he let me examine it. It was a gold Byzantine coin. There was an effigy of some absurd emperor on one side. The other side had been worn practically smooth, and he had cut on it, rather barbarously, his own initials, GWS, and a date, 24 July, 1892. He told me he had picked it up in Constantinople. Well, the first odd thing that happened was this. Samson was doing Latin grammar with us. One of his favorite methods was to make us construct sentences out of our own heads to illustrate the rules he was trying to make us learn. Of course, that is a thing which gives a silly boy a chance of being impertinent. There are lots of school stories in which that happens, or anyhow, there might be. But Samson was too good a disciplinarian for us to think of trying that with him. Now, on this occasion, he was telling us how to express remembering in Latin, and he ordered us each to make a sentence bringing in the verb memini, I remember. Well, most of us made up ordinary sentences such as, I remember my father, or I remember his book, or something equally uninteresting. But the boy I mentioned, MacLeod, was evidently thinking of something more elaborate than that. The rest of us wanted to have our sentences passed and get on to something else. So someone kicked him under the desk, and I, who was next to him, poked him and whispered to him to look sharp. But he didn't seem to attend me. I looked at his paper and saw he had put down nothing at all. So I jogged him again, harder than before, for keeping us all waiting. That did have some effect. He started and seemed to wake up. And then very quickly he scribbled about a couple of lines on his paper and showed it up with the rest. As it was the last to come in, it turned out that the clock struck 12 before he had got to MacLeod, and so MacLeod had to wait afterward to have his sentence corrected. There was nothing much going on outside when I got out, so I waited for him to come. He came very slowly when he did arrive, and I guessed there had been some sort of trouble. He told me there was no trouble at all, but that he felt Samson was rather sick with him. The sentence he'd written was memento putei interquatur taxus. I asked what did all of that silly rot mean, and what had possessed him to shove it all down. MacLeod shrugged and told me he hadn't the foggiest on both accounts. He said, all I know is it just came into my head and I corked it down. I know what I think it means, because just before I wrote it down, I had a sort of picture of it in my head. I believe it means, remember the well among the four... What are those dark sort of trees that have red berries on them? Yews. The boy told me Samson was jolly odd about it. When he read it, he got up and went to the mantelpiece and stopped quite a long time without saying anything, with his back turned. And then he asked, without turning round and rather quiet, what MacLeod thought he had meant. I told him what I thought, only I couldn't remember the name of the silly tree, and then he wanted to know why I put it down, and I had to say something or other, and after that he left off talking about it, and asked me how long I'd been here, and where my people lived, and things like that, and then I came away. But he wasn't looking a bit well. Next day, MacLeod took to his bed with a chill or something of the kind, and it was a week or more before he was in school again, and as much as a month went by without anything happening that was noticeable. Whether or not Mr. Samson was really startled, as MacLeod had thought, he didn't show it. I'm pretty sure, of course, now that there was something very curious in his past history, but I'm not going to pretend that we boys were sharp enough to guess any such thing. There was one other incident. There came a day when we were going through those dismal things which people call conditional sentences, and we were told to make a conditional sentence expressing a future consequence. We did it, rightly or wrongly, and showed up our bits of paper, and Samson began looking through them. All at once he got up, made some odd sort of noise in his throat, and rushed out by a door that was just by his desk. Of course, I thought someone must have put down some nonsense or other, and Samson had gone off to report him. All the same, I noticed that he hadn't taken any of the papers with him when he ran out. Well, the top paper on the desk was written in red ink, which no one used, and it wasn't in anyone's hand who was in the class. They all looked at it, MacLeod and all, and took their dying oaths that it wasn't theirs. Then I thought of counting the bits of paper, and of this I made quite certain that there were 17 bits of paper on the desk and only 16 boys in attendance. Well, I bagged the extra paper and kept it, and I believe I have it now. And so now I suppose you will want to know what was written on it. It was simple enough and harmless enough, I should have said. The man pulled from his breast pocket a scrap of paper that bore the marks of at least 40 years of folding and unfolding for the purposes of repeated examination. This the older gentleman did, and read the writing upon it. Si tu non veneris ad me, ego veniam ad te. Which means, I suppose, if you don't come to me, I'll come to you. After about an hour, Samson looked in again, said he had felt very unwell, and told us we might go. He came rather gingerly to his desk and gave just one look at the uppermost paper. Anyhow, he asked no questions. That day was a half holiday, and next day Samson was in school again, much as usual. That night, the third and last incident in my story happened. We, McLeod and I, slept in a dormitory at right angles to the main building. Samson slept in the main building on the first floor. There was a very bright full moon. Sometime between 1 and 2, I was woken up by somebody shaking me. It was McLeod. In a nice state of mind he seemed to be in, he told me to come and look, that a burglar was getting in through Samson's window. Naturally, I came and looked, and naturally there was no one there. I was cross enough, and should have called McLeod plenty of names, only I couldn't tell why. It seemed to me there was something wrong, something that made me very glad that I wasn't alone to face it. We were still at the window looking out, and as soon as I could, I asked him what he had heard or seen. He said, "About 5 minutes before I woke you, I found myself looking out of this window here, and there was a man sitting or kneeling on Samson's windowsill and looking in, and I thought he was beckoning. I couldn't tell you what sort of man he was, but he was beastly thin, and he looked as if he was wet all over, and," he said, looking round and whispering, as if he hardly liked to hear himself, "I'm not at all sure that he was alive." And the next day Mr. Samson was gone, not to be found, and I believe no trace of him has ever come to light since. In thinking it over, one of the oddest things about it all was the fact that neither McLeod nor I ever mentioned what we had seen to any third person whatever. Of course, no questions were asked on the subject, and if they had been, I am inclined to believe that we could not have made any answer. We seemed unable to speak about it. The sequel to this tale may perhaps be reckoned highly conventional, but a sequel there is, so it must be produced. Last year I was staying at a country house in Ireland. One evening my host was turning over a drawer full of odds and ends in the smoking room. Suddenly he put his hand upon a little box. "Now," he said, "you know about old things. Tell me what that is." I opened the little box and found in it a thin gold chain with an object attached to it. I asked my host about the history of the object. "Odd enough," was the answer. "You know the yew thicket in the shrubbery. Well, a year or 2 back we were cleaning out the old well that used to be in the clearing there, and what do you suppose we found?" I asked, with an odd feeling of nervousness, if they'd found a body. He nodded and told me they'd found not 1 body, but 2. My host said the object on the chain was amongst the rags of the clothes that were on one of the bodies. One body had the arms tight round the other. They must have been there 40 years or more, long enough before we came to this place, he said. You may judge we filled the well up fast enough. The object was a coin, and carved upon it were the initials GWS and the date 24 July 1892. Stick around after the credits for a brief word from some of our fellow indie podcasters, creators, and friends. There may even be some bloopers, outtakes, and bonus content as well. You have been listening to Octoberpod. Octoberpod is produced, edited, and directed by Edward October. The series co-producers are M.J. McAdams and Amber Jourdan. Logo and banner graphics by Jessica Good. Edward October character design by Nick Calavera. Select still photography courtesy of unsplash.com. Select music cues by Dr. Dreamchip and various other stock music and sound effects courtesy of freesound.org. Music from Bigfoot Apocalypse and Thorax, theme from Octoberpod, composed by Nico Vitezi. All other images, music, and FX cues, except where noted, are sourced from within the public domain. Follow us on YouTube at Octoberpod Home Video, on Instagram, and the app I still call Twitter at Octoberpod VHS, and on TikTok and Blue Sky at Octoberpod. Or find us and all of our links on the World Wide Web at octoberpodvhs.com. For business inquiries or story submissions, email octoberpod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this program, we'd be very pleased if you told your friends about us. And while you're at it, write us a 5-star or equivalent review wherever you're listening. The man who spoke to you was Mr. Edward October. Listen up, true crime fans. I have a podcast that you won't want to miss. A heartfelt show that focuses on lesser-known crimes from around the globe called Our True Crime Podcast.
All right, buckle up, I guess. We gotta put our seatbelts on. We gotta go.
Every week, hosts Jen and Cam will guide you through a new case backed up by meticulous research and delivered with the utmost respect for victims and survivors. Cases like the fatal exorcism of Joan Vollmer.
Yes, eyes can turn red and appear to glow from increased adrenaline and blood flow.
I did not know that.
And the Haynes family massacre.
I'm almost afraid to hear it.
As a parent, I don't even know. I don't know.
You'll not only learn about the cases, you'll feel like you're part of a conversation with witty, lifelong friends. That's what truly makes this our true crime podcast. So whether you're a true crime aficionado,
I thought you might say that. I was hoping anyway.
Or a casual listener.
That's a baseball team, Jen, if you didn't know.
Oh, I figured it was some kind of sports ball thing.
Sit down and join us for our True Crime Podcast. Listen on your favorite podcast apps today.
It's a Sunday. I'm sitting in a dark, dark room talking to my best buddy about
crime.
That's right.
Addison is on the air.
Do you love old-time radio?
Yes!
You know absolutely nothing about old-time radio.
Also yes.
Then Madison on the Air is for you. Follow Madison, a modern-day makeup influencer, as she zaps back into the golden age of radio. Every episode is standalone with a wide variety of genres to choose from, like detective noir,
You put the dick in private dick.
superheroes,
So I am in the body of the Green Hornet.
westerns,
Saloon fight! Now this is a Western.
sci-fi,
Dude, the Martian's got a freaking heat ray!
plus classic characters.
Toto! Oh, I gotta get that dog into an obedience class. Really digging Dracula's OG goth style. What if I killed freaking Sherlock Holmes?
And many more. Actual old-time radio scripts adapted.
It's like if the MST3K riff tracks guys were in the movies they riff.
Start at the beginning or jump around to any title that grabs you. New episodes premiere the first of every month.
Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
When you're alone in your house, but you'd like to feel like you're not, the podcast inside your house can keep you company. Our show will make sure that you run up the stairs at night when you turn off the lights and check under your bed before you sleep. We'll fill your dreams and nightmares with bizarre birds, creepy crawlers, and heroic hitmen. We'll have you pulling back the shower curtain, just in case, and side-eyeing your closets as you walk past them. We'll bring you everything from the classics that you know and love to the strange and often silly world of creepypastas. We've even got some stories written just for the show that you won't hear anywhere else. So go check out the podcast inside your house. We're on all major platforms, as well as inside your pantry, your crawl space, and sitting at the foot of your bed at night, watching you sleep.
1, 2, 3, Apple, Baker, Charlie. We're cooking with gas. Abney's Butler Parks, a very staid prefer. Abney's butt. And that Cincinnatus had some valuable remarks upon the subject, and that Cornelius Agrippa had some valuable remarks on the subject. 2 incidents had occurred about this time. Should I do Cornelius Agrippa? And that Censorinus... I'm gonna f that off too. Music becoming creepy. Creepy! From time to time, strange cries, as of lost and despairing wanderers, sounded from across the mere. The mere? These and many similar points were cleared up by the resources of Mrs. Bunch's powerful intellect. Fuck that. Certainly there were plenty of things about the hall and the garden. But it went the same way with him. There a rule. He were a foreigner. Giovanni, he called himself. Giovanni. Giovanni. Now we want the sound bed here to acknowledge that the narrator is referring to himself in this paragraph. That similar happy results may be produced by the absorption. Venting our fucking toxic gas again. Fuck you, fucker. So maybe scratch what I said about the sound bed. We can keep it spooky. I find it set down, moreover, with considerable detail in the writings of Hermes Trismegistus. 2 incidents that occurred about this time made an impression. Fuck. That was a weird noise. The end. Fade out with more music. We're done here.